Welcome to this discussion brought to you by The Space as part of our series of webinars for library staff in the Midlands. I'm Linda Coburn, I'm the moderator for the webinar series. And today I'm going to be talking to Adam Koszary, a digital media consultant and producer. And we're really thinking about some of the tips and tricks that you can use to make efficient, effective, lovely social media. So earlier this week, Adam and I joined a discussion about social media with librarians from across the Midlands, and their jobs ranged from someone who was doing social media on 1 hour a day, 3 days a week, which will be familiar to some of you, to another person whose responsibility was county-wide, looking after a Facebook account and also training library assistants to post content to that account. And some of the people worked within quite a clear local authority structure, while others were in a more kind of flexible setup where they had some more responsibility for what went on. So there was a real range of experiences. And so some of the things that we're talking about today sort of reflect a bit of that discussion. We're going to talk really about two aspects of making social media as effective as possible without making loads of work for yourself. So we're talking about kind of thinking through what's the tone that you want to create for your different audiences and your residents, and also thinking about ways that'll help you to create posts as painlessly as possible. So really thinking about sort of being efficient and time saving. And we'll be picking up on some of the themes that came out of that discussion. So I'm going to ask Adam to introduce himself, tell you a little bit about himself and the work that he does, and then I'll kick off with the questions. So Adam, would you like to describe yourself and introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm a white man in his 30s with brown hair and a comb over and wearing a orange jumper. I've got a bit of stubble. I've been working in galleries, libraries, archives, museums, and a bit of the private sector for over a decade now, starting off in collections, but then falling into social media, doing it for places like Bodleian Libraries, which I know academic libraries very different to public sector libraries, but also galleries like Royal Academy of Arts. I did a tweet about a big sheep at the Museum of English Rural Life, which is a combined gallery, library, archive, and museum in itself. But also working in theatre, Young Vic, did work for Tesla for a bit, but don't judge me, and a bit of time at Canon as well. I think that's me.
Yeah, that's great. That's a really good introduction. Thank you. So we might come back to the big unit, your famous post later on. But first of all, how do you sort of thinking about creating a tone of voice that's right for your service and your audience? What do you think are the key principles that people should be paying attention to?
Well, I always think tone is that balance between what's authentic to you as a service, and usually that's what you as staff think of as your service. Sometimes it's also what you think the public view you as. So if you're not, you can't pretend to be something that you're not. I think you can adapt what you're good at to what works on the internet. So it is that balance between what's authentic to you, but also what your audience wants and like. But then there's also what works on the internet. So being informal in your leaflets and in your on-site signage and how you talk to patrons is still going to be very different to how you're informal on the internet, because you might be adapting yourself to trends, you might be quite chatty, and you got to do it in that very one or two sentences to hook people in and get them interested in what you're talking about. But the general trend in social media for years, and usually galleries, libraries, archives, and museums are all a bit behind the trends, but we're doing much better at catching up. It's been much more informal. And it's because when people go on the internet, everything they consume tends to be the more informal, chatty, and relatable content. Whenever you look at why people use the internet, why people are on social media, when I was at the audience agency, we even did a poll on people that follow cultural organizations on social media and why they do that. And the top reasons were interest in the topic and for entertainment. And then further down the line, you get, I also want to know what's on and how I can engage with this specific institution, which are important things to do because you'll have a core audience who just want to know what's on, what can I do? But generally, people are on the internet to waste time and to be entertained. So if all of your tone is quite service level, like we have this event on, we are closed tomorrow, the lift is broken. why would people follow you? They might dip in just to see what events are on, but they're not going to really create a relationship with you. So even though you've got to be authentic to yourself, what works on the internet still is quite that informal, chatty, sometimes funny tone. But you have to dial it up or down depending on the context. If you're talking about something quite serious, like cuts to the service or something like that, then obviously you're not going to be chatty and informal. But if you're talking to patrons, sharing stories from inside the library, and sharing staff pics, all those kind of things, then the more human you can be, the more that you can talk in the way that you talk to people on site, the better, I would say.
Lovely. Thanks, Adam. And when we were speaking before, you talked a bit about a kind of an approach that you use or tool. I don't really know how you would describe it, but a way in which you sort of work when you're doing this kind of work, how you work out what kind of tone. And that's a really sort of a practical approach. So I wonder if you would sort of give us a kind of an outline of that.
Yeah, this is a problem with tone of voice because it always almost always ends up as informal, funny, and accurate or something. And usually you have it written down in maybe social media guidelines if you're lucky. Otherwise, people are just casting about, think it isn't written down, so they just make it up as they go along and kind of find the tone organically. And that can actually work really well because it gives you a bit more freedom to adapt to new things. But if there's a lot of confusion among your library staff about what you're trying to achieve and how you're trying to present yourself on social media, I know because very often staff are sharing accounts between themselves, so sometimes the tone can shift quite wildly. And you just need to kind of say, no, this is our general approach to keep in mind. Obviously, not everyone can write exactly the same as each other, but it's worth at least having some guidelines. What I like to do is a card sort. So that's I have like 50 adjectives or something like that about different different tones you could adopt. And then I get people to come together, the right people in the room, whether that's people on front desk, management. Usually they're the same people I found in libraries. Um, to go through those and then sort them into three categories: who you're not, how you sound at the moment, and who you would like to be. And it's almost as important to get that who you're not as it is to figure out who you are and who you want to be. Because if you're saying that you don't want to be stuffy, then that logically leads you to we want to be, exciting and engaging with people. But you're still dealing with adjectives that can be dug into. So it's the process as much as what comes out the other end. Because it makes people really analyze if we're saying that we're funny, what does that mean?
Mm.
Like, what kind of funny are we? Are we a dry wit? Are we trying hard? Are we doing little jokes? Or is it just something that's kind of diffused among how we talk to people? Because I find that pretty much everyone you meet is funny in some way and at some level. It's not like they're trying to do stand-up comedy every day. It's just you throw it in where you can. And it's those kind of discussions where you really dig into who the core of who you are and how you're trying to come across. But at the end, you want to end up with about three or four clumps of those adjectives and who you want to be. And some of that might come from what you are at the moment. You want to hang on to some of the things that you're coming across as at the moment. Otherwise, it might be you're looking at what works well on social media at the moment and thinking, we want to be more like that.
Mm.
And then it's a case of, well, how do we create content that sounds like that? And it might be writing exercises and workshops to train staff. You could just do little experiments every week. I know no one has any time, but it's at least good to have an objective and an agreement generally of this is what we want to be like, because it gives you the license to do it and it gives you a stick to beat people if they don't do it or if they do something wildly counter to it. Um, I was going to talk about how you need an editor, but that might be more useful for another question.
It might be, but and I just wanted to pick up it in because you said that doing that exercise, we're really conscious of how little time people have to spend on this. But you're saying that you could do it in what a couple of hours maybe if you were kind of getting together, or maybe if you could do some of the work remotely, ask people to do it while they're on the desk or
Yeah.
whatever, have their thoughts, and then kind of bring all of that back together. So it wouldn't have to be a huge undertaking in order to kind of get to where you wanted to be tone wise.
No, I think people think this kind of thing takes ages. I think you could even do it in an hour if you've got a small enough group, because it is just sitting down, sorting through it, having the discussions, someone writes it up. And I do this workshop remotely as well. So if you can get a digital whiteboard, I think Teams has that function now, then you could also just do it remotely or dip into it.
And one other question, is it better if you're thinking about adjectives, if you are the person choosing the adjectives, are you already skewing it? Would it be better to get some other people to think about what words fitted into those categories? Where do you find the words, the adjectives in the first place?
That's why I quite like to have a good cross section of staff from across an organization. So it's not just, say, the chief executive doing it. But I think that's a really good idea. Like getting actual service users in to say, well, this is how I perceive you based on reading this content, and this is how I'd like you to be. Usually I do that by proxy by doing an audit of content. So looking
Mhm.
at what people have liked, what people have commented on, and using that to say, well, this is how people react to our stuff at the moment. It depends what's easiest for you. That I think that's a good proxy, but if you can get like pin people down in the library and put some posts in front of them and say, what do you think of this and how would you like us to be in the future? Then that's gold dust. I know it's not exactly representative of all your users, but it's useful.
Yeah, absolutely. Sort of thinking about it from an audience perspective rather than your own.
Yeah.
Thank you. Do you have any examples to share of organizations or people who you think have done this, set a tone really beautifully that people could look at?
Beautifully. But the best library that I follow on social media at the moment, I think, is Milwaukee Public Library in America. And I know that's it's a bit of a tricky comparison because they're a state library, quite well resourced, a lot of staff, big building. But even when you compare them to similar size services in the UK, they're just doing a much better job. And it's because it's consistent. So the tone, you immediately get a grasp of what they're trying to do when you look at their content. They adapt to a lot of trends, but they always keep it relevant to the library and what people are interested in.
Okay,
And they've
lovely.
really embraced video content, particularly on TikTok. And I think half of that is driven by they're trying to get younger audiences interested in using the library and its services. So a lot of the content's relevant to them. Um, but also we've been talking about tone of voice, and people traditionally that was just how you write. But I think it's also about the general tone of your video content as well, because it's as much about the spoken as the written word and how you want to come across. So even though you're using this, it's quite good for writing prompts. It's also good just for general content prompts.
Yeah. So it's just kind of like I'm thinking as you're saying that it's like a kind of thing about tone might be spirit, the spirit of what you're doing as well, mightn't it?
Yeah, I really like if for a private sector example, Monzo, the internet bank, have published their writing principles on their website, and they're incredible. And obviously, because they can afford to pay the best people in the business to do it for them and all the rest. But it's a really good thing if you need an inspiration for how this might look. And they've got good examples of what they don't want to sound like, and then how the tone of voice makes it how they want to sound. And it's as much about, yeah, the general vibe to their content as much as it is about the writing.
Lovely. Thanks, Adam. I think we're going to move on. So we've talked a bit about tone, and there's some really good hints and tips in there. And to thinking about what other sort of recommendations might you make to time poor librarians to helping them to make the most of their assets, their resources, and sort of efficient ways of creating content for social media.
Well, I've been in this position of doing social media in like 10% of my job and time. And actually, when I did the Absolute Unit tweet, that was in one of those roles. I was managing an Arts Council funded NPO and was just doing social media on the side because it was fun. But I wouldn't have been able to do any of the social media we did without having content to draw from.
So,
Because,
oh, go on, finish off. Then I'm going to ask you a question. Go on,
um,
because
well, we had a digitized collection, but we also had photographs, and we knew they were content approved, copyright free, and all the rest. And I know libraries are slightly different because you're dealing with published works and copyright is much more of an issue if you don't have a kind of special collections. But at least having a bank of photographs that you know you can draw from regularly. If that's photographs of people that were approved, photographs of the building, potentially even nicking photographs from other copyright-free collections from other archives and libraries, as long as you cite your sources, that will take away a lot of the pain.
Yeah.
So you're not constantly having to create new things all of the time.
So with the absolute unit, were you kind of just raking through photographs and thinking that's a funny one?
Pretty much. I think we were doing that classic thing of it was one of those hashtag days. I think it was National Unicorn Day. So I was trying to find a sheep with sometimes you get sheep who grow a single horn out of their forehead. So I was trying to find that, and instead that sheep showed up, so I just tweeted that. But that was because internally we'd also had a discussion about which collections we were allowed to use, both in a copyright sense, but also in an ethical sense. So we were only allowed to use the animal photographs uh, in a playful way, not photographs of people. So again, it's all that kind of foundational stuff that lets you then play at the top.
Like a sort of creative constraint almost. What
Yeah,
can I do with what I've got?
it's like here's the playground and here's the don't touch it.
Okay, so you're talking about thinking about what you've got in resources and banks of things and where you can go, and if it's photographs, things that you can just go to without having to think every time, where am I going to find a
Yeah.
photograph?
And the same thing goes for tools like Canva. So I had to teach myself Photoshop and using Adobe, and now I just use Canva all the time because it's so much easier. And if you're a not-for-profit, you can get a pro license, but it might be a bit tricky for your local authority because I think you might be classed as a government. But having brand templates on there, so you make a template, say for an event, and save it as a brand template, and then you can just keep reusing that for every event you do rather than making things from scratch. So you could already tell a lot of my tips are almost front loading the effort so that you're saving yourself time in the future, but you kind of need to just do the work at the beginning to
Yeah.
give you that leeway.
Yeah, absolutely. And hopefully there's a bit of a call out to people to say, look, I need a bit of time to make this all work really, really effectively. Okay. And what about for those people who are um for the people who you just we're talking about sort of being short on time, how do you manage this when if for somebody who's doing this kind of on the side of all their other tasks and their other responsibilities, how do they keep themselves going? What would be your secret there? Finding
Uh,
efficient ways of doing things.
so I know that one of the librarians we're talking to this week just has it on their laptop when they're on the front desk. I think having it as a background task is quite useful because even if you're busy with something, at least this was the case with myself in past jobs, you could always find time to at least check Facebook or check Twitter and see what's happening and reply to people and do something that just comes to mind. But it depends on you. The other thing I like to do is set a format. So you might have a reusable thing you can do every single week. So the classic might be the Waterstones staff picks of favorite books, or it could be a question that you ask your audience related to the best books I've read recently or listened to, or favorite authors, or whatever it might be. And it's brainstorming a whole list of those things that you can then just churn out week after week. So again, you're not constantly every day and every week thinking, oh Christ, what am I going to post today? But you've got this bank of content that you can just work through. And that's what I've done in every job, even when I've been in bigger content teams. It's just really good to have that fallback of, oh yeah, last month I just sat down and wrote down 20 prompts that I can post on Facebook. I'll just throw one of those out today and it's job done. But again, it goes back to that. You have to invest the time to save the time.
Yeah.
But if you have no time to begin with, it might be a case of asking other staff to help carve it out. All depends on your context.
One of the other things that we spoke about earlier in the week with the other librarians was the idea, we discussed it with how people schedule and putting putting notifications so that if anybody's emails or not, so if anybody posts to the account expects a response, they sort of have a sense of when they might hear back and how important that was.
Yeah. And I find that in every organization that does that finds that useful to be quite clear that these are operating hours when you can expect a response, and outside of those hours, we won't respond. And Facebook has some quite good auto reply things you can do on Meta Business Suite. So if people say send a message after 5 o'clock, they immediately get a reply saying we're out of hours, we'll respond in the morning, kind of thing. But also scheduling is the lifesaver. And it goes back, if you've got that list of reusable ideas, you could even at the very beginning just space those out over the week. So it's just making the best use of your time. And I think you can schedule on pretty much everything now. Before you had to use free tools like Hootsuite, which you can still use, but sometimes they fall over. But now you can schedule on pretty much everything, I think, except TikTok. And I think Twitter make you pay. It depends if you're still on Twitter
Yes.
/ X.
Indeed. We're quite near the end of our time now. I just wondered, was there anything else that you would like to say? Any other sort of points that you'd like to get across before we finish up?
Well, it's that general advice, which I never know this is with how helpful this is, but you'll kind of know what people don't really respond to. And it goes back to why people are on social media. It's that entertainment, just trying to find out something new and interesting now, waste their time for a few seconds, which they can relate to. And you might look at the content you post and realize that only 10% of your content is like that, is trying to entertain or inform people in a way that would make them come back to your account, look at your content, and make a relationship with you. And it is worth thinking, do we need to be posting all of this stuff? Do we need to be posting it everywhere? Do we only need to be posting events, say, on Facebook? Do we only need to be posting certain things on X or Threads or whatever? And the more fun you can be and the more time you give yourself to do things outside of just the marketing messages is usually where the success comes from. Because there's no single route or silver bullet to getting viral content that will grab everyone's attention. It is usually just increasing the opportunities for you to have a bit more fun, experiment a little bit more, and just keep trying new things. So I know sometimes it's like shouting into the void, but even when you go on very high performing accounts, you'll sometimes see that only 1 out of 10 videos or 1 out of 10 posts does really well. And it's because they know they just have to keep plugging away and keep experimenting and learning. So even though you don't have time, there's too much to post about. We're not doing heart surgery. Just try and find the time to have fun, and things will flow from that, I think.
Lovely. Thanks, Adam. Thank you so much for all your insights and tips. That's been really helpful. And I hope that you, audience, are enjoying listening to this conversation. And that's it. We'll say goodbye now. Thank you.
Sure.